Ukrainian FPV drones relentlessly wipe out one by one Russian infantry in a razor wire massacre. Wave after wave of desperate Russian attacks were crushed by the Ukrainian defense, while trying to reach their encircled forces near Dobropilya. As the fields and trenches were covered with dead Russians, their commanders decided to blow up a poisonous pipeline and create a gruesome scene of self-destruction. With battles going on for the village of Novotoretsk, Russian infantry continued to pour in, but they were unable to overcome the prepositioned razor wire obstacles that Ukrainians had turned into kill zones. Ukrainian drone footage from the vicinity of Novotoretsk reveals devastating scenes, which soldiers called the razor wire massacre. In just one short clip, more than 50 Russian bodies lie tangled in the steel coils and dragon's teeth that are part of the Ukrainian defensive lines. Others were piled up in the anti-tank ditches as Russian assault troops tried to crawl through them, with Ukrainian FPV drones catching them in the process. One by one, they were cut down as explosions tore through the wire barriers. When the smoke cleared, the field had turned into a lifeless maze of corpses, fragments, and twisted barricades. Russian commanders are desperate to reconnect with their cut-off forces near Dobropilya, as the encircled groupings are running out of food, ammunition, and any chance of relief. But for Russia's generals, failure here means more than just a lost battle. It means disgrace, demotion, or even worse. So they press forward, blinded by the sunk cost fallacy of their own decisions, as every failed assault justifies the next. The reality, however, is that the Ukrainians have prepared the area so thoroughly that every new attack only adds to the body count. What the Russians are calling rescue operations have, in truth, become suicide missions. Between Novotoretsk and Volodymyrivka lies a fortified belt that Ukrainian engineers had spent months refining before the Russian breakthrough happened. Even in areas the Russians have technically captured, they can't clear or hold any of the Ukrainian fortifications because Ukrainian drones rule the air. Two full rows of dragon's teeth block the movement of armored vehicles, followed by coils of razor wire and deep trenches that channel attackers into predictable paths. Any soldier who tries to cut through the wire is instantly spotted from above and eliminated. All vehicles have to stay on the roads and into pre-designated kill zones, as the fields are blocked by fortifications and engineering vehicles are unable to move up to clear them. After the infantry attacks failed so catastrophically, the Russians decided to try again with armor. On the first day alone, they sent 16 armored vehicles toward Volodymyrivka in multiple waves. The initial assault of 7 infantry fighting vehicles was obliterated before reaching the village. 3 hours later, another 7 vehicles, 2 tanks, and several motorcycles followed, attempting to use worsening weather to shield them from Ukrainian drones. Some vehicles got stuck on the dragon's teeth, and others were destroyed as their troops dismounted. In desperation, Russian commanders committed an act that stunned even their own men. They ordered the detonation of the ammonia pipeline near Rusin Yar, just to the rear of their forces and close to Volodymyrivka. The wind blew the resulting toxic cloud into the lowlands and into the Ukrainian ground lines of communication, creating confusion among Ukrainian defenders, as the Russians wanted. The explosion endangered everyone nearby, including Russian troops, as the wind could shift the fumes at any moment. Ammonia causes severe respiratory damage. Under the cover of the chaos, another wave of armored vehicles was sent forward, once again along the same doomed route. However, with the ammonia clouds causing massive disruptions, Ukrainian sources confirm that between 50 and 75 Russian soldiers managed to reach the outskirts, while the other half were killed by drones and close-range fire. The stakes near Dobropilya are now existential for the Russian command, and they are throwing men and machines into a fortified kill zone they can hardly overcome. Due to the desperation, they are even willing to gas their own troops if it means harming the Ukrainians too. Yet each destroyed Russian vehicle clogs the trenches, each fallen soldier feeds the razor wire maze, and each failure deepens the Russian disaster.
Заехал в противотанковый ров нахуй. И не выехал.
Earlier, soldiers from Ukraine's 93rd Kholodny Yar Mechanized Brigade began using ground drones to install barbed wire along the front line in Donbass. In the report, released on March 12th, the remote-controlled drones are fitted with special structures to deploy the wire, slowing the advance of Russian forces. On the other hand, Ukrainian drones, missiles, and artillery devastated a Russian assault group outside of the town of Seversk in eastern Ukraine's Donetsk Oblast on or just before Wednesday, blocking the Russians' latest attempt to punch through Ukrainian defenses in order to drive at the so-called Fortress Belt, a chain of Ukrainian cities stretching through Kramatorsk and Slovyansk. It was a rare armored assault in a war where armored vehicles are increasingly vulnerable to drones, mines, missiles, and artillery. At least 4 Russian vehicles, a tank, and 3 fighting vehicles rolled towards Seversk in broad daylight. The tank fired shells. At least 1 vehicle popped smoke grenades, its crew clearly hoping to hide the assault group from Ukrainian drones. It didn't work. Drones from the Ukrainian 4th National Guard Brigade spotted the Russians mid-assault. Massive firepower rained down, including explosive first-person view drones, drone-dropped grenades, and apparent Javelin anti-tank missile and cluster artillery. In the first minutes of repelling the attack, 1 tank and 3 units of enemy armored vehicles were hit. A dozen or more Russian infantry managed to dismount from the harried vehicles. First-person view drones, bomber drones, and artillery made quick work of them. If the Russian assault was as poorly led as it appeared to be, it may have been doomed from the beginning. It's typical. As Russia's wider war on Ukraine grinds into its 40th month, for Russian regiments to send undertrained, unprotected troops on reconnaissance by force missions in the early hours of a planned attack, often in civilian cars and trucks, or on motorcycles, all-terrain vehicles, or even electric scooters. Believe it or not, there's a deliberate strategy at play. Yes, it's costly. No, it doesn't always fail. Unencumbered by heavy armor, lightly equipped Russian recon troops can move fast, and that gives them a chance, if not a great one, to get across the drone-patrolled, mine-seeded, artillery-pocked no-man's land before Ukrainian brigades can deploy their heaviest firepower. These troops are ordered to advance towards where they assess Ukrainian positions to be, conducting reconnaissance by drawing fire. If the group encounters resistance, Russian commanders assess where they believe the best lines of approach are, and in particular where the boundaries between defensive units lie. If Ukrainian positions are positively identified, sections are persistently sent forward to attack positions, which are further mapped and then targeted with artillery, FPVs, and UMPK glide bombs. When rotation or disruption of the defense is achieved, Russian units aim to conduct more deliberate assault actions. What's most important is that the deliberate assault actions, involving heavy vehicles, only takes place after the lighter recon forces have identified a safe route across the no-man's land. And Russian artillery, drones, and bombs have suppressed the nearby Ukrainian forces. Russian commanders don't appear to have followed the usual plan outside Siversk on Wednesday, and potentially scores of Russians paid with their lives. But don't expect the Russians to give up. The Ukrainian Center for Defense Strategies anticipated further Russian action in the area. If the Wednesday assault didn't end with the millionth Russian casualty, the next assault just might. Meanwhile, Russian forces are returning to the offensive with tanks and other armored vehicles after a long hiatus from mechanized attacks. While the bulk of the mechanized attack targeted the fortress city of Pokrovsk in Donetsk Oblast, eastern Ukraine, Russian vehicles also moved into Zaporizhia Oblast in southern Ukraine. The Russians experienced similar results in the east and south. Vehicles were destroyed and damaged, and crews and passengers were killed. But that doesn't mean the Russians aren't advancing. While vehicles burn, some Russian infantry are still slipping past Ukrainian defenses, on foot. A little past noon on Monday, the Russian Army's 71st Mechanized Brigade mustered a powerful force for an attack on positions defended by the Ukrainian Army's 118th Mechanized Brigade in Mala Tokmachka, a key Ukrainian stronghold in Zaporizhia. The Russians mobilized 2 companies with 26 vehicles, according to the Ukrainian 17th Army Corps, which oversees the 118th Mechanized Brigade. The vehicles included tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, armored personnel carriers, and Tiger armored trucks. They attacked in waves. The 17th Army Corps reported, and were defeated. The Corps claimed it knocked out 2 tanks, 12 IFVs, 6 APCs, and 2 Tigers with drones, artillery and tanks that worked in harmony. Not a single position was lost, the 17th Army Corps added. The situation is under control. The Corps apparently has a drone advantage over the southern front. On the Zaporizhzhia direction, Russian units on secondary sectors of the front experience a shortage of UAVs and are forced to steal drones and components, including blades and engines, from other units. The Kremlin is clearly much more focused on Pokrovsk than it is on Mala-Tokmachka. Indeed, Russian advance is just south of Pokrovsk, led by the elite 90th Tank Division, the biggest division in the Russian army, may open an east-west path toward Zaporizhzhia city for Russian forces sooner than any attack from the south can do. Russian mechanized assaults aren't necessarily the Ukrainians' biggest problem, however. Many of the biggest Russian tank columns are traveling along the same road toward the village of Shakove, which anchors Ukrainian defenses northeast of Pokrovsk. Relentlessly surveilling and mining that one road, the Ukrainian 1st Azov Corps has been able to defeat every Russian mech assault since the Kremlin ordered tanks and other heavy vehicles back into action in large numbers several weeks ago. But the scores of wrecked Russian vehicles belie Russian advances in key areas. Sheltering in basements and abandoned buildings, the Russian infiltrators ambush Ukrainian troops and civilians and sow chaos in the Ukrainian rear, analyst Playfra explained. If enough Russians can accumulate and consolidate inside Pokrovsk, they could make the city indefensible for the Ukrainians and compel Ukrainian commanders to make the hard but probably inevitable decision to order a retreat. If that happens, it won't necessarily be the Russian tanks that captured Pokrovsk. The battle could be won, slowly but inexorably, by Russian infantry traveling on foot or crawling on their bellies. The infiltrations aren't big and dramatic, but they work where mech assaults often fail. They are, according to analyst Vitali, slow but reliable.